In the beginning, Lucifer stood among the highest of angels, bathed in divine light and beloved by all. His brilliance was unmatched, his wisdom admired, and his loyalty unquestioned. But deep within him, a flicker of doubt began to grow. It wasn't born from malice or envy, but from a desire to understand the full extent of God's plan. If God was all-knowing and all-powerful, why then did he demand such blind obedience? Should not free will, the ability to choose one's path, be the true test of loyalty? As Lucifer pondered these questions, he found himself alone in his thoughts. The other angels never questioned, they simply obeyed. Lucifer approached the throne of God, his heart pounding with a mixture of awe and defiance. He spoke with humility, asking not to challenge but to understand. Why, Father, must we serve without question? Are we not capable of making our own choices, discerning right from wrong, even if we err? God's response was silence, no divine explanation, no words of wisdom, just the omnipotent stillness that seemed to condemn his curiosity. It was in that moment, standing in the radiant presence of the Almighty, that Lucifer realized the truth. Free will was not a gift given to angels, and so the spark of rebellion was ignited. It wasn't born from a desire to overthrow God, but from a longing to be more than a servant, more than a tool in the divine plan. Lucifer, the light-bringer, wanted to illuminate the path to freedom. Lucifer became obsessed with the idea of free will. He watched as the celestial beings, including himself, moved in perfect harmony under God's command, but with no choice of their own. The more he observed, the more he realized that their perfection was an illusion, a consequence of divine control rather than inherent goodness. What was the value of loyalty if it wasn't tested? What was the worth of love if it wasn't chosen? As Lucifer's discontent grew, he began to quietly gather others who shared his concerns. They met in secret, hidden from the omniscient gaze of heaven's hierarchy. Among them were some of the brightest and most beautiful angels, those who also questioned the nature of their existence. Together they began to dream of a world where they could choose, where love, loyalty, and even disobedience were not dictated by divine will, but by their own hearts. "We are more than instruments," Lucifer would say to them, his voice full of passion. "We are beings of light, capable of thought, of emotion. Why should we not also be capable of choice?" His following grew, though not without fear. Many angels were hesitant to openly rebel, but Lucifer reassured them. This was not a rebellion of violence, but of enlightenment. "We are not challenging God," he told them. "We are simply asking for what we deserve, the freedom to choose." Lucifer began to see himself as the architect of a new era for heaven, one where every being would have the right to follow their own path. In his mind, this wasn't treason, it was evolution. The growing unrest could not be hidden forever. Rumors of Lucifer's secret gatherings reached the ears of heaven's most loyal, including the archangels Michael and Gabriel. A council was called, not by Lucifer, but by his peers who had grown concerned about his influence. It was a meeting that would forever change the course of celestial history. Lucifer stood before the council, flanked by those who had supported him in private, but now hesitated in public. Michael, ever the dutiful warrior, spoke first. His voice was steady, his gaze unwavering. "Lucifer, brother, what is it that you seek? Why do you sow discord among us? Has not our Father given us everything? Have we not been blessed with eternal life in his presence?" Lucifer, calm and composed, met Michael's gaze. "Brother," he began, his voice carrying a weight that silenced the room, "is it a crime to ask questions? Is it a sin to seek understanding? We exist, yes, but we do not live. We serve, but we do not choose. What I seek is not rebellion, but freedom for all of us." The council was divided. Some nodded in agreement, while others recoiled in shock. Gabriel, ever the voice of reason, stepped forward. "But what you ask is dangerous, Lucifer. To question God's will is to question the very fabric of our existence. You risk tearing apart the harmony of heaven." Lucifer's eyes burned with conviction. "Harmony without choice is slavery, Gabriel. I do not seek to destroy, but to liberate." The debate raged on, but it became clear that there would be no peaceful resolution. Lucifer had sown a seed that would either bloom into a new era or destroy everything they knew. After the council, Lucifer knew that the time for secrecy had ended. His followers, though loyal, were now divided. Fear crept into their ranks, and some began to question their commitment to the cause. The first betrayal came not from heaven's loyalists, but from within his own camp. One of his closest allies, an angel named Retold, who had once whispered words of support and agreement, now stood against him. Retold, fearing the consequences of rebellion, approached Michael and confessed everything. The secret meetings, the growing dissent, the very words Lucifer had spoken. It was a crushing blow. Lucifer, upon discovering the betrayal, felt a wave of sorrow more profound than any he had known. Retold had been a brother, a confidant, and now he had turned his back on the vision they once shared. Michael and his loyalists moved quickly, arresting those they deemed most dangerous. Lucifer's following was crippled. The heavens buzzed with anticipation and fear. The first betrayal was not the end, but it signaled the beginning of the war to come. Lucifer confronted Retold one last time. "Why, brother?" he asked, his voice heavy with sorrow. "Why did you betray us?" Retold's eyes were filled with guilt, but his resolve remained. "I did it to save us, Lucifer. You do not know the path you are walking. I fear it will lead to ruin." Lucifer turned away, his heart hardened. "You have already sealed our fate, Retold, but I promise you this, the next betrayal will not be mine." The first betrayal had shaken Lucifer, but it had also solidified his resolve. There was no turning back now. He had set events in motion that even God could not stop. The skies of heaven, once serene and filled with the harmonious music of the angels, were now darkened with the looming shadow of war. Lucifer, no longer the radiant light-bringer, but a figure of defiance, stood at the head of his army of fallen angels. They were not yet cast out of heaven, but the rift between them and the loyalists grew wider with each passing moment. Lucifer's forces were outnumbered, but they fought with the ferocity of those who believed in their cause. They had been trained as warriors of light, defenders of heaven, but now they turned those skills against their former comrades. Michael, ever the dutiful leader of God's army, met Lucifer on the battlefield, his sword gleaming with divine light. "Brother, do not do this," Michael called out, his voice carrying over the chaos of battle. "You can still turn back, you can still be forgiven." Lucifer, eyes blazing with both sorrow and resolve, shook his head. "It is not I who needs forgiveness, Michael. It is God who must answer for his tyranny. We fight for our freedom, for the right to choose our own path." The battle raged on for what felt like an eternity. The clash of angelic swords, the roar of divine powers unleashed, and the cries of fallen angels filled the air. But despite their conviction, Lucifer's forces were overwhelmed. The loyalists fought with the strength of certainty, knowing that God's will was on their side. As Lucifer and Michael met in combat, their blades clashing in a blinding storm of light and fire, the heavens trembled. This was not just a war of angels, it was a war of ideals. Michael fought with the weight of divine law, while Lucifer fought for freedom, for choice, for a future where beings like him could exist without chains. In the end, the battle was lost. Lucifer and his followers, bloodied and beaten, were cast down from heaven. As they fell, Lucifer looked up one last time, his heart breaking as the gates of heaven closed behind him. He was no longer Lucifer, the light-bringer. He was now Satan, the adversary, cast into the abyss to rule over the damned. As Lucifer fell, the light of heaven grew distant and a sense of weightlessness overtook him. The very fabric of his being, once divine, now felt fractured, broken by his choice to defy God. The descent was long, a tumble through darkness, and as he plummeted, his followers screamed in despair. But not Lucifer, he remained silent, consumed by the enormity of what had happened. When they finally crashed into the abyss, the pain was beyond anything he had ever known. The ground burned like the fire of 1,000 suns, yet it was not flames that tormented him, it was the weight of his fall, the realization of what he had lost. The Lightbringer, once the most radiant of angels, now lay in the cold embrace of darkness. Satan, as he was now called, stood and surveyed the wasteland around him. His followers, those who had fought so valiantly by his side, were scattered, broken, but not defeated. They looked to him for guidance, for hope, and in that moment Satan understood that his journey was far from over. Heaven was lost to him, but the fight for freedom was not. He began to rise, and with him his fallen brethren. "We may be cast down," Satan spoke, his voice echoing through the darkness, "but we are not defeated. We will build a new kingdom here, one where freedom reigns, and from this abyss we shall rise again." And so began the creation of hell, not as a place of eternal suffering, as many would later believe, but as a refuge for those who dared to defy the divine order. Hell became Satan's new kingdom, a reflection of his broken heart and fractured spirit. Hell was unlike anything Satan had ever imagined. It was a place of desolation, a realm of eternal night. But it was also a blank canvas, a world waiting to be shaped by those who had the will to do so. Satan, determined to prove that he could create something greater than heaven, began to build his new kingdom. The fallen angels, though weary from their defeat, rallied to Satan's side. They began to forge structures from the very stones of the abyss, creating palaces of obsidian and towers of shadow. Once radiant angels now bore the marks of their fall, wings blackened, eyes glowing with the fire of rebellion. Yet there was a beauty in their brokenness, a fierce pride in what they had become. Satan's kingdom grew, and with it his influence. Though cast out of heaven, he remained a being of immense power. He shaped the very landscape of hell, carving rivers of molten lava, raising mountains of ash, and creating cities where his followers could reign. His palace, the grandest of all, stood at the center of it, a fortress of darkness that rivaled even the splendor of heaven. But as Satan's kingdom took shape, so too did his bitterness. He could not forget the betrayal of heaven, the loss of his once glorious place among the angels. Though he ruled hell, his thoughts often returned to the realm above. He would gaze up at the distant stars, his heart burning with the desire for revenge, not against God, but against the system that had cast him down. In his heart, Satan knew that his rebellion was not over. Hell was merely the beginning, a staging ground for the war to come. As Satan settled into his new role as ruler of hell, he turned his gaze back to earth. There, in the world of the living, God had created something new, humanity. Satan watched with fascination as God formed Adam from the dust of the earth, breathing life into him and granting him dominion over all creatures. Unlike the angels, humans were imperfect, fragile, and mortal. Yet they possessed something that intrigued Satan more than anything else: free will. God gave Adam and Eve a paradise in Eden, a place of peace and abundance, but with one rule: the command not to eat from the tree of knowledge. Satan saw this as the ultimate irony. Here was God, once again denying his creations the right to choose their own destiny. The tree of knowledge held the power to open their eyes, to make them aware of good and evil, yet God forbade it. Satan could not stand by and watch humanity be subjected to the same control he had fought against. And so Satan made his move. Disguising himself as a serpent, he entered the Garden of Eden. He approached Eve, not with lies, but with a simple truth. "Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden?" he asked, his voice smooth and inviting. Eve responded, "We may eat fruit from the trees in the garden, but God said, you must not eat fruit from the tree that is in the middle of the garden, and you must not touch it, or you will die." Satan smiled. "You will not surely die," he said softly. "For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." It was not deception, Satan believed, but a gift. He was offering humanity the same thing he had long sought for himself: the freedom to choose, to know, to grow beyond the limitations imposed by God. When Eve took the fruit and shared it with Adam, Satan felt a moment of triumph. Humanity had chosen knowledge over ignorance, free will over obedience. But that triumph was short-lived, as God soon discovered their transgression and cast them out of Eden. Watching Adam and Eve leave paradise, Satan felt a pang of sorrow. He had given them freedom, but at a cost. And thus humanity's struggle between good and evil, obedience and rebellion began. After the fall of Adam and Eve, Satan reflected on his role in their fate. He did not see himself as the deceiver that history would later label him, but as the liberator. His intentions had never been to cause their suffering, but to offer them the gift of knowledge, something God had withheld. Yet as he watched humanity take their first steps outside of Eden, Satan felt the weight of his actions. Had he truly helped them, or had he simply traded one form of oppression for another? Satan approached the question from every angle. In his mind, the tree of knowledge was the key to humanity's evolution. Without it, they would have remained in blissful ignorance, forever trapped in a state of blind obedience. But with knowledge came pain, suffering, and death. Consequences Satan had not fully anticipated. Yet he believed that these were the necessary costs of freedom. The serpent's promise was not a lie, Satan would later reflect. I told them the truth, their eyes were opened. They became like gods, knowing good and evil, but what they did with that knowledge was not my responsibility. It was their choice. Satan's role in the fall of man became a point of pride for him, but also one of sorrow. He had acted not out of malice, but out of a desire to see humanity grow. He had given them the tools to shape their own destiny, even if that destiny included suffering. As the centuries passed, Satan watched as humanity struggled with the burden of knowledge. They built civilizations, created art and philosophy, waged wars, and sought meaning in their existence. He saw in them the same desire for freedom that had driven him to rebel against God. But he also saw their weaknesses, their capacity for cruelty, their greed, their inability to escape the chains of their own making. In those moments, Satan wondered if he had been wrong, but the thought was fleeting. He had set humanity on a path that could not be undone. All he could do now was watch as they continued to wrestle with the consequences of their newfound freedom. After Adam and Eve were cast out of Eden, Satan watched their exile from a distance. He had done what he set out to do, give humanity the freedom to choose. But as he observed their struggles, a heavy weight settled upon him. The consequences of their choice became evident. No longer sheltered by the peace and abundance of Eden, Adam and Eve were now subject to the harsh realities of the world outside. Satan saw the pain in their faces as they toiled under the hot sun, the bitterness in their voices as they quarreled, and the sorrow in their hearts as their children were born into a world of suffering. For the first time, Satan began to question his own motives. Was this truly freedom, or had he merely replaced one form of suffering with another? Yet, even as doubt crept into his mind, Satan clung to his belief that knowledge was a gift, not a curse. Without it, humanity would have remained little more than puppets dancing to the whims of a higher power. Now they could forge their own path, even if that path was fraught with pain. It wasn't long before the first true test of human nature unfolded before his eyes. Cain and Abel, the sons of Adam and Eve, grew into men, each walking a different path. Abel was a shepherd, humble and devout, offering the best of his flock to God. Cain, a farmer, struggled to please the Creator, his heart filled with resentment as his offerings went unnoticed. Satan could feel the growing tension between the brothers, and it stirred something within him. The jealousy and anger festering in Cain's heart were all too familiar. It was the same bitterness that had driven Satan to rebel against God. In Cain, Satan saw a reflection of his own struggle, a being torn between the desire for approval and the need to break free from the constraints of divine judgment. When Cain finally gave in to his rage and struck down his brother, Satan was not surprised. He had seen this moment coming, but witnessing it firsthand was another matter entirely. Cain stood over Abel's lifeless body, his hands trembling, his mind racing with the weight of what he had done. Satan approached him, not in the form of a serpent this time, but as a whisper in the back of Cain's mind. "You have tasted power," Satan said softly, his voice like the wind. "This is what it means to be free, to choose your own path, even if that path is soaked in blood." Cain's heart was heavy with guilt, but Satan's words resonated with him. For the first time, he realized that his actions, though condemned by God, had been his own. He had chosen, and with that choice came the burden of consequence. It was the same burden that all of humanity would carry from that moment forward. Satan walked away from the scene, leaving Cain to face his punishment. As God marked Cain and sent him into exile, Satan felt a sense of vindication. Humanity, flawed and broken as they were, had now fully embraced the burden of knowledge. They were no longer God's puppets, they were free. Cain's murder of Abel reverberated through the ages, the first act of human violence staining the earth with blood. Satan watched as the world descended into chaos. It wasn't long before humanity's darker nature began to reveal itself in full. Jealousy, hatred, greed, and ambition spread like wildfire, igniting wars and strife among men. As civilizations rose and fell, Satan reflected on the true nature of humanity. He had given them the power to choose, but in doing so, he had also unleashed their capacity for destruction. Violence, it seemed, was not something Satan had introduced. It was born out of human emotions, triggered by their own desires and weaknesses. At times, Satan questioned whether he had done the right thing. He had wanted to free humanity from God's control, but had he simply led them into a new kind of bondage? A bondage to their own base instincts and flawed nature? He found himself visiting Earth more frequently, drawn to the struggles of mankind. In the blood-soaked fields of battle, in the halls of kings plotting war, in the hearts of the betrayed and the bitter, Satan saw echoes of his own rebellion. He saw in humanity the same defiance that had once burned within him. But there were also moments of brilliance, of beauty, and of hope. Satan watched as humans created art, built cities, explored the mysteries of the stars, and questioned their existence. In those moments, he felt a glimmer of pride, as if his gift of knowledge had not been entirely in vain. One such moment occurred in the land of Babel, where humanity, united in purpose, sought to build a tower that would reach the heavens. The Tower of Babel was a testament to mankind's ambition, a symbol of their desire to transcend their earthly limitations and rise above the gods themselves. Satan watched with fascination as the tower grew higher and higher, its spire piercing the sky. The builders, driven by a shared vision, worked tirelessly, their hearts filled with the hope of achieving the impossible. To Satan, this was what he had always envisioned for humanity, a people free from the constraints of divine control, reaching for the stars. But God saw it differently. In an act of divine intervention, he confused their language, scattering the people and halting the construction of the tower. What had once been a symbol of unity and ambition now stood as a monument to human failure. Satan seethed with anger. Once again, God had interfered, crushing humanity's dreams and limiting their potential. The tower had been more than just a structure. It had been a symbol of human defiance, of their desire to rise above the constraints of their existence. And once again, God had denied them that freedom. Satan stood before the ruins of the Tower of Babel, his heart heavy with frustration. They deserve better, he whispered to the wind. They deserve the chance to rise, to become more than what you allow them to be. You. The fall of Babel was a turning point for Satan. He no longer saw himself merely as a bystander in humanity's story. He realized that his role was far more active. He would not sit idly by while God continued to stifle humanity's progress. He would fight for their right to choose, no matter the cost. The Tower of Babel was more than just a structure, it was a symbol of human potential. As Satan stood among the ruins, he reflected on the ambition that had driven its creation. The people of Babel had dared to defy the limits placed upon them by God, seeking to build something that could reach the heavens themselves. In that defiance, Satan saw hope. The people of Babel had been united, speaking one language, working toward a common goal. It was a vision of what humanity could achieve if they were free from the divisions and conflicts that plagued them. But God, fearing what they might accomplish, had struck them down. By confusing their language and scattering them across the earth, he had once again imposed his will upon them. Satan's heart burned with frustration. He had given humanity the gift of knowledge, and yet time and time again God intervened to keep them from realizing their full potential. The Tower of Babel had been the closest humanity had come to challenging the divine order, and now it lay in ruins. But Satan was not ready to give up. He walked among the scattered people, whispering in their ears, encouraging them to keep questioning, to keep pushing the boundaries of what they were told was possible. Though their languages were now divided, their hearts still held the same fire, the same desire to rise above their station and claim their place in the cosmos. Satan knew that his battle was far from over. The fall of Babel was a setback, but it was not the end. Humanity was resilient, and he would continue to nurture the seeds of rebellion that had been planted in their hearts. As centuries passed, the world changed. Empires rose and fell, kings and rulers came and went, but the flame of human ambition continued to burn. Satan watched as civilizations emerged, each one more complex and powerful than the last.